So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. An illness had swept her recently. It was winter, and it seemed everyone was ill, even Margaret Tudor, Dowager Queen of Scots. She was not likely to die, but she felt awful and was quite certain she looked worse. Meg was feeling every single bit of her 35 years. She'd been in Scotland far longer than she was ever in England. She was still far too English for some. She had felt forced to imprison a few of the lords for not abiding by the new regime. It caused everyone else to fall in line. Meg was too ill now and far too tired to stay strong for so long. She had decided she needed to make Archibald a peace offering. She might have made a mistake, firing on him and his men. It had been reckless. As a gesture of goodwill, Archibald was extended an invitation to join the Regency Council. The council did not have the kind of power that a regent would have. The council was simply there to assist the king in his rule. Meg had appreciated the help, so she would have time to get to know her long-away son. This had all turned out to be a huge mistake. Archibald was a cunning man. In what felt like no time at all, he had made several powerful allies in the council. Archibald Douglas, Meg's estranged husband, aided by the Douglas clan, had staged a hostile takeover of the entire government. They had removed her son from her custody. James was still the King of Scots. He just lived in the custody of his stepfather. He was surrounded by Douglas men loyal to his stepfather. Access to the king's body was decided by the Douglas clan. Meg was back to not feeling in control of her life. She took what solace she could in her friendship with Henry Stuart. While Meg had been ill, he had been the only one to show her support. He had shouted and threatened to throw the old regent's secretary down the stairs if he did not leave. Meg felt like he was the only person on which she could rely. From what Lady Catherine Carey could tell from the view from her cradle, she was part of a happy family. She had a lady mother who was so pretty and smelled of lilac all the time. She had a sweet singing voice and often rocked Cathy to sleep. Her father was named William, and he worked for the king. He was away often, but when he would return he would greet her lady mother with a kiss and toss Cathy in the air. He was so tall, and to Cathy it felt like flying. When her father was away, she would often see her lady grandmother, Margaret. She was soft, and Cathy liked walking in the garden with her. Though she was not aware, there was much talk about her Aunt Anne Boleyn. She had made a mistake, and gone after a man who was not free to marry. She had been sent home to repent for having reached too far. She would return to court some day, but for now she would have to present as very apologetic. The sisters were distraught, and Lady Marie of Guise, only 10 years old, had to agree with that emotion. The last 7 months had been very hard in France. The sisters had said many prayers on the royal family's behalf. 7 months before, France had lost their queen. She was just 24 years old. The cause of her death was a mystery to Marie, but she had heard whispers that it was exhaustion. It was strange and terrifying to the 10-year-old Marie that such a young woman could just be so tired that she simply died. Just 2 months after the death of France's beloved queen, they lost her 8-year-old daughter, Princess Charlotte. The royal family had 2 princesses die, Louise, 3 months older than Marie, and Charlotte, 11 months younger. She was happy that she lived out here with the sisters and not in the city with all of its illness. As if God did not think that was enough, King Francis was at war with the English until winter. The English went home, just in time for the emperor to arrive with his troops. King Francis, warned from war, was captured by the Holy Roman Emperor in February. France was queenless and kingless. They were down to 5 royal children under the age of 8. The king's mother was in charge of what government was running, and she was still trying to arrange a ransom with the emperor for France's king. France was in desperate need of God's help, and Marie was doing her best with the sisters to keep his attention. She paused for a moment and added a prayer for the soul of her brave Lord Uncle. Francis de Lorraine had perished at the Battle of Pavia. He had been fighting for their now captive king. Lady Catherine Willoughby was struggling with her sadness for 2 French princesses she had never met. Princess Madeleine was just 5 years old, 1 year older than Catherine herself. Princess Margaret was only 2 years old. The poor princesses had lost their mother last year. Queen Claude of France had wilted away. She was with God. Kit had sat with her governess and prayed for the queen's soul. Then, not 2 months past, they had lost their older sister Charlotte. Kat thought it must be truly awful to lose your mother. She could not even imagine losing her own. The princesses had moved into the valley with their aunt. Kit liked the sound of that. She had heard the valley was nice and warm. She thought if the royal French sisters would be happy, maybe it would be in the valley with their aunt. Princess Madeleine of Valois had settled in nicely to her new home with her Aunt Marguerite and her sister Margaret. She missed her rambunctious brothers and her lord father, but life was lovely in the valley. It was warmer here, and there were far less people. Aunt Marguerite was away often. She was so very busy. But when she was at home, they would sit and read together for hours. Life in the valley had been peaceful until recently. A few months prior, they had received the awful news. The Battle of Pavia had not gone well for the French. Madeleine's father, King Francis, had been very confident going in. He was too confident, and he was captured at the battle. France was without a king for a time. King Francis had left his mother, Louise, in charge while he was away, so she was the acting regent in his absence. Aunt Marguerite was distraught. She worried about the pressure this was putting on her mother, 48-year-old Louise. She was worried about her younger brother, the captured King Francis. She was also worried about her husband, who had been with her brother at the battle and had come home uninjured, but then had gotten ill. Madeleine's uncle Charles, Duke of Alençon, had died while Aunt Marguerite had tried to nurse him back to health. Madeleine was only 5 years old, but she could tell her aunt was struggling. She resented her husband for leaving her brother behind. He never should have left his king. She had trusted him. He was also dying, and while Marguerite had never been in love with him, he had been a good partner. He had allowed her time and space to figure out who she was. Charles had died on Aunt Marguerite's 33rd birthday. The Holy Roman Emperor, 25-year-old Charles V, had taken some important prisoners during his battle. He had the King of France and the King of Navarre in his custody. On the French king's behalf, Marguerite's lady grandmother was negotiating his ransom and release. Madeleine hoped that she could make quick work of it all, and she could have her father back. Princess Mary Tudor's life was in upheaval like it had never been before. She had not had a moment to adjust to any of the changes, some that she had seen coming, and some she had not. Princess Mary was receiving her own household, and everything that came with that. Her things were being packed, and new things were being purchased that would be waiting for her at Ludlow Castle. She would need a court in Wales, and it would be overseen by a governess. Amy Calthorpe would not be joining her as governess. Instead, she would be joined by Lady Margaret Pole. Mary was excited that her old governess was joining her. Lady Pole had a comforting grandmotherly quality that she had not experienced with anyone else. Mary was not the only one receiving her own household. Recently, a boy named Henry Fitzroy had received a residence. It was then that Mary had been made aware that this boy was her half-brother. A whole brother that no one had ever told her about was quite the shock. She had asked her mother if it was true. Her mother had confirmed it, but also said that this son of a common girl was no threat to her. Mary did wish she had been told about this boy sooner. It felt akin to betrayal. Henry had also been named High Admiral of England. Mary did not know how a child of 6 could fulfill this duty, and why at 9 she was deemed not able. One thing she would not have to navigate in Wales was her betrothal to the Emperor. The Emperor had called their betrothal off. He decided that Mary was taking too long to grow up, and King Henry was not offering a strong enough alliance for him to wait it out. Mary did not know who her cousin was going to marry instead. She just knew it was not going to be her. Princess Mary was not going to be the Queen of France or the Holy Roman Empress. The summer of 1525 found Catherine of Aragon not well at all. She could be happy with Henry and Mary. Mary was capable of being queen. She was clever and pious, and with a bit of support and a good match, she would do wonderfully. That was not enough for Henry. He had decided that he needed a son. He had a son, but he needed to make him look legitimate. Henry was elevating his son with that common girl to Lord High Admiral of England. The child was 6 years old. He was being granted a title and a household with an official ceremony. It was already widespread that Henry had a baby with one of her ladies, but until now she had been able to keep the news of this child from her daughter, the princess. Princess Mary knew about her illegitimate half-brother now. It had been confusing conversation with the child. How could her father have a secret child with a common woman? A child that could in time challenge her for the throne. Mary was not as concerned as Catherine, but she was not comprehending the consequences of her father's irresponsible actions. As if that was not enough, Catherine had heard whispers that Henry had been inquiring about a divorce. She could not believe it. Henry was a good Catholic king. He would not divorce her. He had been so opposed to Meg's divorce. But the whispers continued, whispers that kept Queen Catherine up at night. Maybe a quiet life in the country was all Lady Jane Seymour could expect for her future. So far, her father and brothers had not been able to secure her a place at court. She was 17 now, and several of her peers had gotten married, and a couple of them had children by now. Jane's eldest brother had gotten a promotion of sorts. He had been made Master of the Horse for Henry Fitzroy, the king's 6-year-old son. Henry had his own residence and needed an entire staff to care for it. Jane was proud of her brother, but she wished he could find her a position. In news on matters of the heart, there was a boy who was interested in Jane, William Dormer. He was the son of a knight whose lands neighbored Wolf Hall. She had always thought that she was meant for a job at court, but this was the only opportunity presenting itself. William had told Jane that his mother was not happy with this match. She was actively fighting against it. William had also told Jane he was working on changing his mother's mind. Jane thought she could imagine herself as the wife of a country knight, just like her mother. Lady Anne Boleyn was licking her wounds after her disastrous attempts at arranging her own marriage. She had been forced to leave public life after the embarrassment. Henry had married, but Anne had heard through friends of friends that the couple was not happy, and Cardinal Wolsey was still attempting to interfere. Anne missed Henry, but she was happy she was not involved in this mess. She was, instead, enjoying her time as a muse of a poet. Thomas Wyatt was a genius. He was one of the best poets of the time, and he wrote poems about Anne. He had a wife, but he had charged her with adultery. Their marriage was over. Anne knew it was not proper to be spending so much time with a married man, but he was a fun distraction while she recovered from her court exile. Thomas was not the kind of man Anne would marry. Thomas was the kind of man that would say pretty things and write flattering poetry, and that made Anne's cheeks blush and her bruised ego feel a little better. Anne's brother George was doing well in court. He had been appointed gentleman of the bedchamber for the king. He would assist the king in getting ready every morning and every evening. he would also spend most days with him, filling security and social needs. Everyone spoke about how much he reminded them of his father as a young man. His wife had been thrilled, but Anne had taken notice that her sister-in-law, Janie, was still not with child. Anne's lord grandfather had died last year. Her lady mother had been so sad. He had been the Duke of Norfolk, and Lady Elizabeth could always rely on him. The new Duke of Norfolk was Anne's Uncle Thomas. Anne's uncle had become the new Duke, but also recently lost his position as Lord High Admiral. The placement was going to the king's illegitimate son. Things at court could change so fast. Anne just had to figure out how to change it for her benefit. As 1525 dragged on for Lady Catherine Parr, she turned 13 years old. She was not married yet, and for that she was thankful. She knew her duty, and she knew that she would be married soon. Being a married lady did not have to mean that was her whole life. Married ladies could attend court and read poetry. She could even get groups of friends together to talk about what they were reading. At 13 years old, Kat did not feel in a rush to marry. She did feel prepared, though. She knew how to run a household. She could be a wife. Mary was making a rare appearance at court. Her presence was not required, but greatly appreciated. Mary's 2-year-old son Henry was being invested as the Earl of Lincoln. She was now not only a duchess, but the lady mother of an earl. Charles had sought Mary's forgiveness for his previous indiscretions by asking the king to bestow this title on their son. This would make it clear to everyone who the rightful heir was, despite Charles' children roaming the realm. As part of the investiture, Charles had arranged a profitable betrothal for their son, still toddling around the room. He had been so small he had to be carried through the entire ceremony, and now he was to be betrothed. The betrothal was made for the daughter of a baron, William Willoughby. Mary was pleased with this match. Catherine was the only child of Baron Willoughby and his wife Maria. She was 6 years old, the same age as her daughter Eleanor. Mary had known Maria since she was a child. She had traveled from Spain with Catherine. Mary had always liked her, and her daughter seemed like a miniature of her, yet more English. This match would provide Henry with a sizable inheritance someday, as long as Maria did not have another child. Catherine was the Baron's only heir. Funds had been dwindling somewhat. Charles' eldest daughter had recently been married. Charles had provided her a dowry, but Anne had not been appreciative. Mary had done her best to impart courtly manners on her stepdaughters, despite the low birth of their mother. Anne had not taken to these lessons as well as her sister Mary had. Anne did not care for her new husband. She was an ungrateful teenager. This match was to a 22-year-old baron who had already proven himself at war with her father in France. Anne had said she did not love him, and for a moment Mary remembered herself at Anne's age. She had been sent away to marry a king almost 3 times her age. She had not loved him either. Mary had married King Louis out of duty. Love came later. A kind of excitement settled over the royal house of Cleves. Sibylla was 13, and according to her mother's ladies, Princess Anna von Euler-Cleveberg's sister, was growing into a fine young lady. The betrothal proposals had started rolling in. The ladies would have no say in who Sibylla ended up with, nor would Sibylla. Their father would make the choice. Sometimes, though, he would listen to her mother's opinion. She had his ear on occasion. Anna's mother was hoping Sibylla would match with a powerful Catholic. She was a strong supporter of the Pope, and hoped nothing more for her daughters than a strong Catholic marriage. Anna tried to imagine the marriage proposals she would receive. They would not be as grand as Sibylla's. She had been groomed for a grand marriage for as long as Anna could remember. Surely, though, she would get a few. She was only 10 years old, but a betrothal could be in the not-so-distant future. The peasants were still in revolt, and it was bad. At first, some of the landowners had agreed to some of the demands. As time went on, they had taken back their promises. They had told the peasants to go home. The peasants had not taken well to that, and it just amplified their anger. The revolt had still not reached Cleves. Anna knew that her father was different. He was not so strict. The people of Cleves seemed to benefit from some amount of tolerance. Anna's mother was a strict Catholic, but her father was a strict humanist. He identified as Catholic, but observed a much more moderate path. This moderate style of ruling seemed to keep the peasants away from revolt. It also meant that Sibylla could be married to a Protestant in the name of peace, and Anna's mother did not like how that felt. 1525 had blessed Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury. She had reached the age of 52. Her parents had only lived about half of that. They had never seen either of their children grow up or met any of their grandchildren. Maggie was thankful she was having a different life than her parents had. Henry and his wife had just welcomed their fourth baby. She was a little girl that they named Winifred, after a Catherine, Thomas, and a Henry. They were choosing this name themselves. Maggie did not openly approve of the name, but secretly she loved it. Arthur was having a second baby with his wife. She was also a girl. Her name was Jane. Maggie thought this made her sound very English. She was soaking up all of her grandmother time while she could. In short order, she would be joining Princess Mary at the new household that was being set up for her at Ludlow. Maggie was a bit nervous to return to Wales. The last time she had lived at Ludlow, she had tried to nurse Arthur and Catherine back to health. Arthur had died, and Maggie had broken her cousin's heart when she was notified. Maggie could not take it if another heir died on her watch at Ludlow. She would have to make sure Princess Mary stayed safe at all costs. As winter was settling over England, Lady Catherine Howard was turning 2 years old. She was perfectly happy in her busy household with all of her brothers and sisters. She was too young to notice that none of them had clothing that fit right. Sometimes her mother would cry, and Kate would stroke her hair. Father was away a lot. He was always trying to find work that would supply him with the funds he needed to live the life that he preferred. He was not a successful man. His ideas never seemed to work out. He would return home to the adoration of all of his children, and the worry on Joyce Howard's face. Recently, Kate's uncle had lost one of his positions. The Duke of Norfolk had been the Lord High Admiral for the king. He had been told he would give that up. The king's 6-year-old son was now filling that position. Kate heard people talking about this illegitimate son and how King Henry doted on him, but she paid no mind. She was not interested in such things. Married life had not been exactly what Lady Jane Parker had expected. She was beginning to think that her future with George was not as magical as she had once hoped. She and George had nothing in common, it seemed. He was pleasant to look at, but he preferred to spend any free time away from Janey. She had tried to speak to him about her worries, but he had just told her that his father told him love would find them in time, and they had not had enough time. Mary had left court. She had gotten pregnant with a baby girl. Janey knew that Mary's husband had claimed the little girl, but there were many whispers around court that it was the king who was the father of Mary's baby. It mattered not what the whispers were. Mary was at home, rearing her baby alongside her husband. The king had started looking for a new favorite. Anne had been allowed to return to court. Janey had not missed Anne so much, except when George had left the city and gone back to Hever to visit her. He never invited Janey to come along, but he had told her what he had learned. The king was now pursuing Anne. Janey thought it must be strange that Anne may take her sister's place in the king's affection. Anne had recoiled from the prospect at first. She did not want to take Mary's place, it would seem, but the king had been relentless. He had won Anne over. Janey's father-in-law had explained to Anne that it would benefit the entire family if Anne stopped rebuffing the king's advances. She had eventually relented, and her father, Thomas, had been made Viscount Rochford. It was a huge step up for the entire family. They were noble now. In time, George should inherit that title, and Janey would become a viscountess. Janey wished she would fall with child as Mary had. Not exactly as Mary had. Janey wanted George to be her baby's father, not King Henry. She was thankful that the king's wandering eyes had not fallen on her. He had a habit of finding his wife's ladies quite appealing. With Gertrude and Mary away from court starting their families, Janey had been quite lonely. She had never been close with Anne. But with Anne back at court, She vowed to try again. George loved his sister and enjoyed spending time with her. If Janey was her friend, maybe George would spend time with her also. It would complicate things with the Queen, but Janey was sure that the King wanted Anne back at court. Janey vowed to turn things around with her sister-in-law. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.